In winter of 2013, a little show named Tamako Market aired. About 4 years after it came out, I decided to watch it on a whim. It mainly followed the daily antics of a girl named Tamako. Tamako was characterized as a girl that was single-mindedly devoted to making mochi. Everything in her life revolved around mochi. She woke up and made mochi. Then she went to school, shared that mochi that she made, and thought about mochi. Then she went home and made more mochi. Everything in her life was about mochi. All the while, it slowly exposed us as the audience to the community that she lived in. It was about as comfy as a show could get. But as comfy as it was just that. It was a slice of life down to the core, with no real plot and really slow character development. Not that that was a bad thing, I found myself enjoying it immensely. Tamako Market is slice of life. It's not just a member of the incredibly ill-defined genre that is slice of life, it is a slice of the very essence of life. Its incredibly dense and atmospheric community was presented and run in a perfect harmony where everything had their place and everything ran smoothly. Watching the show is similar to taking a warm bath. It makes you feel like there is still good in the world, and like people are still inherently good. But a very common criticism levied against this show is that for all intents and purposes, nothing happens, which is totally fair. Like I said, there's no clear arc for the three main girls like there was for the girls in K-On!, nor was there any plot happening. Granted, there was a subplot about the island prince, but it never really felt like the main drive of the show. Instead, the show, at its best, was mainly focused on developing the community and showing them go about their lives. There was no conflict. But then, I saw the movie. The feel of Tamako love story is almost completely at odds with that of Tamako Market. While the scenes in Tamako Market tended to have their own flow and rhythm to them, much of the dialogue scenes in Tamako Love Story were long and drawn out. But why is that? That is because Tamako Love Story makes one significant addition to the structure of Tamako Market that so radically upsets the status quo that the fundamental nature of the movie ends up feeling completely different from that of the show. Tamako Market adds a conflict. Now I know you're probably thinking, big whoop, it's not like basic narrative structure necessitates the usage of a conflict so that a rising action, climax, and resolution can occur so that a story can, happen. And to that I say, wow, you sound really pretentious in saying that, even though you're technically just me posing as a hypothetical version of the audience, so basically I'm just calling myself pretentious. And to that I say, yes. However, to disrupt the status quo in such a big way is an extremely bold move. Tamako Market's main appeal was that nothing happened. So by injecting conflict into Tamako Love Story, the tone of the series as a whole could have been completely screwed up. Instead, things got really interesting. You see, the introduction of the conflict is really subtle throughout the movie, so when things do climax, you as the viewer do not feel like drama is just spontaneously happening. However, the reason I think this was achieved was because of one scene in the film, the confession scene. To explain why I think the scene was able to do this, I'm going to have to break it down in pointlessly meticulous detail. This scene can be best described as a struggle for control. For the first minute or so, Mochizo desperately tries to gain a foothold to make his statement that he will be attending college in Tokyo, but is constantly interrupted by Tamako, who, like she usually is constantly reflecting on whatever catches her fancy at the moment. At the moment, her attention is focused on a small rock that she notes is similar to the daifuku that her family makes. It isn't until about a minute and a half into the scene that Mochizo finally manages to draw Tamako's attention by leaving the conversation altogether and going on to the stepping stones. The control threatens to return to Tamako as she regresses to talking about mochi, but as a breeze blows through between the two of them around 2 minutes and 37 seconds, control returns to Mochizo. Tamako realizes that she was talking about herself and yields some of her attention to him. However, just as Mochizo begins to talk, Tamako slips and drops the rock she had been holding. This literally shows Tamako drop a symbol of her single-mindedness about mochi into the water, and is immediately followed by Mochizo catching her, effectively putting him in a position of power over her. For the next minute, Mochizo stammers out his decision to go to school in Tokyo, and soon after, his confession of feelings for Tamako. It is after a moment of taking in what had just happened that Tamako suddenly, almost out of instinct, tries to get away and accidentally falls into the water. After being hoisted up out of the water by Mochizo, her manner of speaking suddenly becomes completely sterile and awkward. We then watch as she runs away in the wrong direction and the scene ends. So, as a confession scene, this scene is already really well staged as a conversation with tons of subtle symbolism and clever shot compositions. However, the real importance of this scene comes from its significance in the overall narrative. As previously mentioned, the show largely had a flow to all of its scenes. Everything fit comfortably in its own little place, and there was never anything wrong. However, there is a reason for that. With Tamako as our lead, we largely gloss over any conflict, major or minor, that happens from episode to episode. Up until this point, Tamako had largely ignored everything in her life that was not Mochi. This confession scene is effectively a wake-up slap to Tamako. Even up until the beginning of the scene, Tamako was still relentlessly talking about Mochi, so when Mochizo suddenly confessed to her, her entire world was effectively shattered because something even more important than Mochi had happened. Her lifelong childhood friend had just announced that he would be leaving to go study filmmaking while also confessing that he was madly in love with her. As people tend to do when confronted by new and unfamiliar settings, Tamako's first reaction was to run away. However, when that results in her falling off the stepping stones and into the water, she is effectively splashed in the face with cold water, similar to how one would splash water on their face to wake up. This establishes a definitive shift in tone from the comfy slice of life one of Market to the more serious drama one of Love Story. But that's not it. It isn't just the fact that there is a shift. Its effectiveness as a scene is its ability to remain consistent with the rest of the show. Now here's where it gets really interesting. I largely skipped over the flashbacks presented just before the confession in the scene, but they are what really make this shift work. The most important flashback presented is that of her memories of her mother, consisting mostly of point-of-view shots of her as a child looking at her mother. Interspersed between these shots is one of a hand holding a daifuku with a face on it. Being situated between these shots of her mother makes us, as the viewer, make the assumption that it was her mother holding it. I mean, the hand belongs to a body wearing the same clothes as her mother, so of course it's her. Except it isn't. The film first tries to mislead us into thinking it's her father, but as anyone who's actually seen the movie can attest to, it wasn't her mom. It was Mochizo. Knowing this fact suddenly adds a new layer of dramatic irony to Tamako's speech about Mochi. The reason why she was so devoted to Mochi is that it reminds her of her mother. Except, the reason why it had reminded her of her mother in the first place was because it was Mochizo that had cheered her up with Mochi when her mother died. Therefore, when she was not paying attention to Mochizo, she was actually thinking and talking about a feeling caused by Mochizo. And the true genius of this is that the foreshadowing of this isn't even remotely subtle. Mochizo's name is literally Mochi. If you're still not getting it, let me rephrase it. Tamako is being drawn away from Mochi by Mochi. This is what allows such a dramatic shift in tone to happen while still maintaining consistency. The thoughts that occupy our thoughts are still about Mochi. Not Mochi, but Mochi. For an example of how this maintains cohesion, just look at the scene before the baton performance. When they're asked to shout out what they like, Tamako still calls out Mochi. It allows her to maintain character among her friends, while still showing that she had undergone a significant change over the course of the movie. So yeah. Hello and welcome to a series I'm going to be calling Mildly Interesting. This is going to be a series of short editorials on things you did not and will never care about. They will usually be about anime. But since classes are going to be starting up again soon, I probably won't make that many videos, so this series might not be a series at all, but like, who knows. Thank you for watching, subscribe, I don't know, bye.